Tonight, somewhere between silence and memory, a signal travels through the dark, a faint frequency, an old transmission, and if you are hearing this now, it means someone, somewhere, is still listening. This is Echoes of War, a program carried through the static of history, where the voices of soldiers still echo across time. So take a moment, pour whatever is left in your cup, sit closer to the radio, and listen carefully, because tonight, we are going back to a morning the world will never forget. June 6th, 1944, the day history would later call D-Day. But what you are about to hear tonight is not the story of generals, not the story of maps, not the story of strategies written in command rooms. Tonight, we listen to the memories of 5 men, 5 soldiers who survived the beaches of Normandy, 5 men who stepped into the storm and somehow lived to remember it. Some names have been changed, but the fear, the chaos, the courage, all of it is real. And before this transmission ends, you will understand why many of those men spent the rest of their lives trying to forget what they saw that morning. The night before the invasion was strangely quiet. Across the English Channel, an armada larger than the world had ever seen waited in darkness. More than 5,000 ships, destroyers, transport vessels, landing craft, and inside them, young men, most of them barely 20. Some cleaned their rifles again and again. Some wrote letters to families who would never read them. Others simply sat in silence, because everyone on those ships knew one thing. By sunrise, many of them would be dead. Among those soldiers was a young infantryman named Thomas Carter. He had grown up in Ohio, a small town, quiet streets, fields that stretched beyond the horizon. Before the war, the loudest sound in his life had been the whistle of passing trains. But that night, as the ships began to move, the ocean itself seemed to tremble. Engines roared to life. The invasion had begun. Far above the fleet, the sky was already full of aircraft, hundreds of transport planes. Inside them sat thousands of paratroopers. One of those men was Samuel Whitaker. The red light inside the aircraft illuminated the faces of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder. Each one carried nearly 40 kilograms of equipment. Rifles, grenades, ammunition. Some carried small photographs in their pockets. Others carried nothing but silence when the aircraft crossed the French coastline. The sky erupted with anti-aircraft fire. Tracers cut through the night. Explosions shook the planes. And then the green light appeared. Jump! Samuel stepped into the darkness. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Only wind, only silence. Then the parachute opened. Below him stretched the black fields of Normandy. But something had gone wrong. Paratroopers were landing everywhere. Scattered, lost, alone. When Samuel hit the ground, he realized he had landed far from his unit. He was behind enemy lines, and the invasion had not even begun. Back on the sea, the first waves of landing craft were lowering into the water. Among the sailors preparing those boats was Michael Donnelly. His job was simple: drive the landing craft to the beach, drop the ramp, turn around. But there was one thing every crewman understood. The closer they got to shore, the more dangerous the mission became. Because the Germans were waiting, the coastline of Normandy had been transformed into a fortress. Concrete bunkers, hidden artillery, machine guns pointing directly at the water, and long rows of steel obstacles designed to rip open boats and drown soldiers. The men inside the landing craft could already hear distant explosions. Naval guns from Allied battleships were firing toward the coast. The sky flashed with artillery, but even those massive bombardments could not destroy everything hidden along those cliffs. and the Germans knew exactly where the invasion would come from. Among the soldiers preparing to land on Omaha Beach was a combat medic named Daniel Brooks. Unlike most men around him, Brooks did not carry a heavy weapon. Instead, he carried a canvas bag. Inside were bandages, morphine, medical tools. His mission was not to take lives. His mission was to save them. As the landing craft bounced across the rough water, Brooks could hear the soldiers breathing around him. No one spoke. Then someone whispered a prayer. Another soldier closed his eyes, and in the distance, they could finally see it. France, the coastline, the place where thousands of men would soon step into history, or die trying. The first bullet struck the water before the landing craft even touched the sand. German machine guns opened fire from the cliffs above. Long streams of bullets ripped across the waves. Some landing craft were hit before they even reached shore. Inside one of those boats stood Thomas Carter. The ramp had not even lowered yet when the first soldiers beside him fell. Then the front door dropped, and the world exploded. Bullets tore through the open ramp. Men fell instantly. Some were killed before they could take a single step. Carter jumped into the water, but the equipment on his back pulled him down. For a terrifying moment, he sank beneath the surface. The cold water filled his helmet. Around him, other soldiers struggled. Some never came back up. When Carter finally reached the surface, the beach was chaos. Machine gun fire, explosions, smoke, screaming, and the sand was already turning red. Further down the beach, Daniel Brooks had barely reached dry ground when the first wounded men began crawling toward him. Some were missing equipment, some were missing weapons, some were missing limbs. The medic dropped to his knees beside a young soldier whose leg had been shattered by a bullet. There was no time to think, only time to act. Brooks applied a tourniquet, injected morphine, dragged the man behind a steel obstacle. All around him, the battle raged. Bullets struck the metal barriers around the beach. Explosions threw sand into the air. But Brooks kept moving from one wounded man to the next, and the next. Hours later, he would barely remember the gunfire, but he would remember the voices asking for help. Meanwhile, offshore, Michael Donnelly guided his landing craft back toward the beach again, and again, and again. Each trip carried another group of soldiers. Each trip meant passing through artillery fire. At one point, an explosion struck the water so close that the entire boat lifted from the waves. Shrapnel tore through the side of the craft, but Donnelly kept the engine running because the soldiers inside were counting on him. By the end of the day, he had crossed that deadly stretch of water more times than he could remember. Some of the men he carried into battle never returned, but some did. And sometimes, that was enough. Back inland, Samuel Whitaker moved carefully through the dark fields of Normandy. The invasion had begun, but the sky was still black. He could hear distant gunfire, but he had no idea where his unit was. Eventually, he found two other paratroopers hiding beside a hedgerow. They had landed miles from their drop zone. None of them had a radio, but they had a mission. Together, they began moving through the countryside, searching for roads, bridges, and German positions. Small groups like theirs would play a crucial role that night, confusing the enemy, destroying key defenses, and preventing reinforcements from reaching the beaches. But at that moment, there were just 3 lost soldiers walking through darkness. Back on Omaha Beach, Thomas Carter finally reached the narrow strip of sand beneath the cliffs. The first wave had been nearly destroyed, but something remarkable began happening. Small groups of soldiers started moving forward, not as organized units, just men crawling through sand, taking cover behind craters, finding ways to move closer to the enemy bunkers, Carter joined a handful of survivors climbing the steep embankment toward the German positions. The machine gun fire was still relentless, but by midday, some Allied soldiers had reached the top of the cliffs. The battle was slowly turning, not because of a single plan, but because thousands of individual soldiers refused to stop moving forward. By the end of June 6, 1944, more than 150,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy. Thousands were dead, thousands more were wounded, but the beaches were secured, and the liberation of Western Europe had begun. Years later, those 5 men would live very different lives. Thomas Carter returned to Ohio. He rarely spoke about the war. Daniel Brooks continued working in medicine, but he never forgot the voices from that beach. Michael Donnelly stayed in the Navy for years. Even decades later, the sound of artillery still echoed in his memory. Samuel Whitaker attended reunions with other paratroopers. Sometimes they laughed about the chaos of that night. Sometimes they sat quietly, remembering those who never came home. War leaves many things behind. Helmets buried in sand, letters that were never delivered, and stories that continue to echo across generations. Tonight, you heard just a few of them. This has been Echoes of War. If this signal reached you, then somewhere out there, someone is still listening. Until the next transmission, good night, soldier.